Bridgette, thanks so much for joining us today on an N of One. I know you know the show and me, and we've known each other a long time, so this should be easy. As you know, an N of One is about focusing on the individual stories of applied behavioral scientists. So much of the time we talk about population level behavior change, and we forget that there are people that do this work and that they have journeys and that those journeys are themselves interesting. So thanks so much for coming on and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. We're gonna go the way back. So talk to me about little Bridgette. I want to go to like 7, 8 years old. Like we're going.
Wow, that's very way back.
Oh yeah, we do the way back. Like if I had found 7-year-old Bridgette, what was she thinking she was gonna do in the world?
Oh, that's easy. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist.
Give me.
I was, yeah, I was very curious about the world, which I think I still really hold on to that with my behavioral science lens. But I was probably a little more into kind of the physical world at that time. You could often find me on the ground inspecting things, trying to find animals, etc. And I had a cousin who's a year younger than me, who's now a professor at UAF in Fairbanks, who's a wildlife microbiologist. So I had this cousin who we were joined at the hip at trying to explore the world. So it was great. But home life was a little more complicated. And I started to, I think, apply that kind of curiosity into human behavior and like, why were things like they were? I could observe that they weren't necessarily like that at friends' houses, and not to go too into the weeds there, but by the time I was looking at what I wanted to do for college and the practicality of things was right front and center for me, that I decided a degree in marine biology was probably not going to get me to a place of stability in the way that I thought at the time. And that was now like 17-year-old me thinking that. So and I don't know if I still agree with that perspective, but so I went to University of Illinois just kind of as a bio major, and then decided
before we get to college though, you're going too fast, man. You went from 6 to 17 just overnight. That's a very quick growing up there.
It feels, I think that's how fast it felt in real time even.
Well, that's always the interesting thing about that age, right? It both goes very fast and very slow. Did you have exposure to psychology and things in high school? Was that a part of your sort of high school experience? You know, I went to school in rural. We did not. That was not a thing for me.
Yeah,
we've had guests who got exposed.
Yes, so I was in. Yeah, that's a good question. I grew up in Chicago, and I did have a social studies teacher that I think really got us thinking in some really interesting ways. Probably that now I would say we're exploring psychology, philosophy, some of those things, but not outright, not really like with that particular lens. So I felt like a lot of what I was observing and then trying to like find words even within myself to articulate was very challenging. And I could only go back like years later and kind of apply terminology to the concepts that I was observing without really having words to apply to them at that time.
Which is its own form of convergent validity, right? If you are noticing things in your world, even though they have not been introduced as concepts and you don't have words for them, and then you learn the concepts, you learn the words, it's very validating to be like, oh yeah, that thing, I know that thing, I've seen that thing. I didn't know it was called that. I didn't know
Mhm.
it had a formalization, but I've seen it and I felt it and I've heard it. And psychology can have that sort of cross-validated feeling that helps you go like, oh yeah, that might be a thing. So
Yeah.
marine biologist, okay, maybe not so
Mhm.
practical.
Yep.
You're not being super exposed to psychology, but you find yourself fascinated by people, and then you go off to college. Tell me
Yep.
about that journey. Like, what did if I talked to a 17-year-old, all right, I'm going here and I'm doing this, what would Bridget have said?
Yeah. Well, I think it was interesting because I didn't have a lot of support for thinking about college. I was the first one in my family to go to college too. And so a lot like any conversations about that was just happening with my high school counselor at the time. And I ended up going to University of Illinois, and it was the only place I applied. I There was no like, oh, apply to a number of schools, etc. So it was really interesting. Like my journey was very almost like kind of happenstance, or just like finding my way as I was going versus like a lot of forethought that I think may may happen for my own kids or that I see around me now and all of that. Um, but I went in as a bio major, knowing that I just loved science. But then as I was exploring the career options, most of them were like bench sciences that were being presented to me. And I realized even at that age that that wasn't going to be satisfying to me, that I wanted to do something that was applied with people. And I don't even remember why or how I took this. It could have been like it just fit into my schedule, but I ended up taking a general, like a basic nutrition course. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to be able to nerd out on biochem and the complexity of things, but also translate that and work directly with people. So I ended up changing my major and going into something called a coordinated program in nutrition, which prepared me to become a registered dietitian. So that was my first like career move out of school.
And
And
and how far into school were you when you sort of made this potential RD shift?
I think I was already like 2 years in.
Got it. So you
So
kind of
this it kind of extended my time a little bit, but yeah,
so you're on this biology track. You sort of go, hey, I'm liking the work, but I'm not liking maybe where this leads. Uh, and that sort of pivots you over to this potential RD place where you're like, hey, this is a thing I can envision myself doing. This is a part of
yeah.
the journey that I'm on.
Hmm.
And so you go off on this RD path. Did you take psych classes? Like, where is psych in this journey?
Yes. Where is psych in this journey? So we did have to take some basic psych courses. Um, just really like, I think oh my gosh, it's been a while now, and I can't really recall if I had to do one or two courses. I feel like I had to do two. They were very general psych courses. Um, the typical, you have to participate in 2 to 3 studies that college students are doing in those semesters.
Hey,
But it was
we need a participant population somewhere. And if we weren't forcing
exactly,
intro psych students to do experiments, the whole machine would just grind to a halt.
exactly. So did that, and that was it. Like I, there wasn't really more about the psychology of eating or like that perspective that I got in my program at the time. They did talk. I remember this one class, and I don't remember exactly what it was in. Which course it was in, but they did mention stages of change, like a blip on that. But I remember it so clearly because it was so interesting to me. I was like, oh, and
So when it
I got
pinged
out.
up, it
Yeah.
was a firework. When you saw it, you were like, hmm, that
Oh,
thing.
there's something there, right? Like, yeah. And so it really stuck out to me that I can remember that sitting in class and being like, oh, this is juicy. This is really interesting. And this feels like something that can be really useful. And as I started practicing, even prior to like in the residency prior to becoming an RD, but then also then as I got out and practiced as a very new RD, it became clear quickly that writing up somebody's diet plan and handing it over, telling them to come back and see me in whatever time and we'll weigh in and we'll do this, that wasn't really cutting it. It wasn't addressing so many of the factors that were kind of really in the way, or even just like, let's educate people on how to eat. I don't know where things are now. Maybe people need much more education in terms of the loss of some of that in school. But when we're talking about the early 2000s, late 1990s, the most people I talked to had that general sense of how you should be eating, right? Of like what a kind of healthy diet looks like.
I don't get the sense that's
But
changed.
actually doing it,
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't get the sense that's changed.
actually,
My 9-year-old knows that French fries are not the greatest food on earth for you, right? He does not need like, an RD does not need to tell him, hey, this is not a super great idea. You shouldn't drink quite so much soda. Like many of these
right.
concepts have become extraordinarily pervasive.
Yeah,
At the same
yeah.
time, it's interesting that there's all this like fringe YouTube content about, if you eat these carbs in this order, there's all sorts of weird fringe dietics.
Oh, yes.
But the
My
basic
goodness.
level, people kind of know, look, fruits
Yeah,
and veggies
right.
good, fried things bad, like
Yeah,
sugar
right. There's
bad.
like that. And so felt like there was so much emphasis on the I guess you could call it knowledge piece of things. And then the like, here, I'm just going to give you a plan that gives you this percent of your macronutrients and, whatever. And that's the way we were taught at the time. Uh, and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
Right? I could see that pretty quickly, like, wow, this doesn't really work. So I became, what's the word? I is just like, what am I going to do with myself? I got myself in working in nutritional epidemiology because there I could have more rigor. I was um, and working as a research dietitian, and helping to design meals, sometimes helping to design some like patient education material type stuff, uh, like let's test the Mediterranean diet for this population or that.
So your first
But there
pivot
was
was
like,
from individual to group, right? So I will be
yeah,
an RD for a person versus epidemiological RD, where you're like, all right, now we're going from the unit of analysis as the person to the unit of analysis as the
yeah,
population, which is the first, right? The
yeah,
behavior change is individual to group and, things that don't work to things that do. Sometimes we find
mm-hmm,
people go this way and then up, right? And then sometimes we find people go this way and then over. So you were this way and over. You went to the population level, but I still don't have the sense that these diet plans are maybe working at the population level either. And then that moved you over.
right, yeah. Sorry, lost you there again for a second, but I think I caught the gist of what you were saying in terms of sort of the individual versus population level. And it was still missing this applied piece that I felt like I wanted to have in my work. I did um I did spend a year working for Aramark doing prison dietetics as well, which was interesting and disheartening, and I just could not see myself staying there. So I started on a journey of keyword searching, like what is out there for me that I could possibly switch into. There was a part of me that was also like, if I'm gonna, oh yeah, go ahead.
And was applied. You said I was missing that applied piece. Did you have that language at the time where you were saying behavior change applied, like these are words that are in your concept, or you just sort of know this thing ain't it? And now I'm looking for the vernacular. I'm looking for the vocabulary that's going to help me get there.
Yeah, no, at the time I was definitely searching for, I didn't know what to call it. I didn't have applied, I didn't have behavior science. I didn't have any of these words at the time.
And
Um,
contextualize this in
but I
time.
did know that.
Contextualize this in time for me. Like
Say again.
where in your career are you? What time are we talking about here? Is this 2005,
Okay. Yeah,
2010? Like,
this is only like 3 years in, let's say, about 3 years. So this is pretty early still, I think. But I just could tell this wasn't going in a direction for that I felt was fulfilling and that was going to have the kind of impact I wanted to have.
and Bridgette, not everybody knows my age is obvious because I don't have hair. You still look very youthful. So 3 years in is in the 2000 somethings,
Oh
2010.
yeah. So like middle to mid 2000s here now.
God.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just that
Well,
you
thank
don't have
you.
these terms. The
So
industry
you can
doesn't
see
have
the
these.
grays.
These industry doesn't have these terms, right? Like the reason to contextualize this and why this is important,
Yes.
right? There's a difference between, hey, in 2018, I figured out that I want behavioral science and I could go search for behavioral science, and 2005, where even if you search for behavioral science, you wouldn't have found anything because the field hadn't sort of got there yet.
Right. Exactly. You know, when I get there in a sec, when I did finally find some of what I was very interested in around digital health, we weren't calling it digital health either. We were calling it M Health and Health 2.0. And if you remember some of those types, but we we had like a number of different terms or a kind of, you know, us early Twitter people, hashtag M Health, hashtag Health 2.0, etc. So yeah, the terminology has changed quite a bit over the years, but um, I wasn't sure what to even search for, so I was using terms where I thought maybe I could somehow get like take my science perspective and something with like creativity like so I started keyword searching like science and communication or health and media, and health and media helped me find the company called Health Media, which um, was bought by Johnson and Johnson, I think around 2008. It started by Vic Strecker over at University of Michigan. Um, some of our notables like Amy Booker came from Health Media.
Yep.
And I cold emailed Vic and said, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I found his UMM email address and he got back to me right away. I mean, and I had a conversation with him that changed my life. It's really like this pivotal piece where he helped give me some of the language and helped me find that that there were people also interested in this. And for me, it was still thinking about my background in health and empowering people to help them make health behavior changes. And where the direction he pointed me was to health communication, which um, I don't love I still to this day don't really love that as the term for that field, but it does take a somewhat of a like a communication lens, or at least like a lot of what we're doing here is through messaging, and this is for health behavior change. Or really, it is one of the fields of applied behavioral science. And I ended up um, this time I was very planful. I applied to a bunch of different programs um, and uh, ended up going out to a graduate program that was very unique. It doesn't exist like this anymore, unfortunately, but it was a collaborative program between Emerson College and Tufts University through the med school, both really close to the Boston Common. So I went from Chicago out to Boston, had a new experience, very, very interesting from a cultural perspective, even. But from there, I was pretty set on like my path where that I knew I wanted to apply this work in the technology space and and help develop health interventions based on what I had started to learn what they were doing at Health Media, and then finding some really other early players in that space. And so even prior to actually matriculating, I started to do some work, just like some consulting work for some companies that were also working. There's one that's not around anymore called NutraInfo that was really leveraging also my nutrition degree and nutrition background. But I was really starting to think about the, even though I didn't have all of the education yet, I think just the way I was thinking about it was already somehow trending towards this behavior science perspective without even realizing it, which is interesting. But really thinking about the user experience of this platform and how we would be able to design it to enable the right behaviors,
And
and
talk to
thinking
me about
about
finding
things.
those early
Yeah, go
partners.
ahead.
Like, how did you, we were just Googling terms, you were going to conferences. Like, how are you sort of finding these early folks to consult
Yeah,
with who
it's
felt
so
like they
funny
were
because,
aligned with you?
yeah, I don't know if I even had Google at the time. And now I'm like, well, what search engine was I using? Um, but a lot of it was through what was happening in the academic spaces, actually. Um, and it was looking on some of like the job boards there at some of the institutions I was looking at around health communication. And interestingly, there were a number of things that we're already looking at. How can we leverage what like emerging technology to perhaps influence behaviors? And so this was, some of those early partners came from folks who were doing research through Michigan State. There was just some like conversations with people once I got out to Boston, just talking with folks and professors. I'm luckily not very shy, and I'm just like, they might be a bigwig in their field or whatever, but I'm going to be like, hey, I'm Bridgette. Here's what I'm up to. All this, and they often like, I think, were excited about my energy about some of this stuff too, and we're like, oh, I might have a way to kind of plug you in, and if you could help me with this perspective. So I ended up working with some folks doing things very early on, at least with like embodied conversation agents, folks that were coming out of Media Lab when I got there, and helping them think about what that could look like. And so uh, it's interesting that I think really it was mostly academia at first, and then it was going to conferences like Games for Health, which used to be often in the Boston area when that was still happening, and just kind of a lot of networking. That's one thing I'm pretty strong at, and comes easy to me. So for those of you listening that it doesn't, I hear you, but encourage you to challenge yourself, because it's been one of the things that has opened doors for me in my career, beyond most others, is really just chatting with people. What are my ideas? Where are they going? And the collaboration. So I've had a lot of, next to my full-time roles or school, I've had a lot of opportunity to do project work, where I could plug in and provide some perspective, and then perhaps roll off and into the next.
Got it. And so as you're networking, as you're meeting these people, and then you graduate, what do you like? How are you looking at the job market? How are you trying to understand, again, health
Yes.
communication? I know you understand. I don't love the term health communication either, although communication is one of the levers that we end up pulling a lot of
One.
times. And you do
Yes.
end up, I mean, at Eliza, where communication is, it's a very communicative focus. So how did you think
Yes.
about the landscape as you came out of grad school?
Yeah. Well, I came out in early 2009. So
Which is a
2008
great,
recession,
great
right?
time to be graduating into the job market, as I recall. It was just lovely.
Yeah. So uh and I think it's changed now, luckily, but if you wanted to work in this kind of digital health world, I mean, you were usually looking at the coasts. Maybe you're going out to California, or I don't know, mostly California. I don't remember anybody talking even about Seattle or anything at the time, but maybe a little bit going on there. Or somewhere on the East Coast, like Boston area or DC or maybe Atlanta because CDC was doing a lot with health communication, et cetera. So I was not going back to the Midwest. So staying in Boston and kind of thinking narrowly about sticking around there. But just lucky, I got lucky because there was a lot going on there. And again, a lot of networking, talking to folks, because I had already been doing that throughout my master's degree, and seeing where I could fit in there. I ended up doing the first couple of years there. I ended up for some small stints at a couple places where now people are in this, unfortunately, like continuing to see layoffs all the time in the last couple of years here. But at that time, a similar thing was happening. So I came into, I don't know if you had ever heard of Health Dialogue. Health Dialogue was huge as well in this area. Got hired in as their first ever like behavioral strategist, which was super exciting. Was doing some really interesting predictive modeling work, and then I got laid off. So that was like really sad. But luckily I was able to like
But
take
wait,
on different. Yeah.
let's zero in on this because this is the first
Okay.
time behavior is in the role. What
Yes.
did you think you were going to do, and what did they think they were buying?
Well, luckily, the Paul Rosenthal, who hired me in, had also come out of our program and was in Health Dialogue, being very focused in on that, working with insurers and working to work with members to do certain behaviors. I mean, they were really focused in on the behavioral science aspect. And rather than being somebody who was there to, let's say, more create the content and that the actual working pieces of the interventions, it was kind of more strategic, higher level. How is this all going to kind of fit together? Now, and I think it's a little bit different than maybe some of the strategy or the business strategy pieces, right? So I want to just say for you and for the audience that we're talking about more of the intervention strategy for particular, contracts that we perhaps were involved with. And so it was very interesting work. I think we had an idea of what it would look like, but it also was exciting because I was able to help shape what it actually started to look like as we got in and figured out what we needed to do, working very closely with data scientists and also the other folks who were more in the weeds of the creation of the program. And I love that collaboration and that dot connecting and just kind of like how do you pull all these different things together. And again, I think that's where I always kept going like, oh, I love the complexity and maybe sometimes even the ambiguity that I like run toward that to kind of help make sense of it. And then how does it all come together? And it's like, oh, it's almost like a surprise every time too, because you don't know where you're going. But in the end, you come up with these models or these other pieces that you're just like, wow, this is really incredible. And I did not really get a chance though to test this stuff before I got let go. So that was a bummer.
Yeah.
But I did start to have other opportunities as things came along to actually, again, flesh some of these things out and then start to test and see just how powerful this work can be.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, and it's always tough to get a layoff, and it sounds like one of the you made a good call out about, hey, I'm doing a lot of intervention design, but it's not necessarily connected to the business, and that can be a trap sometimes, right? If you can't find a way. I was just talking to somebody on one of my open office hours calls who had a really great team, did a bunch of really cool things, but could never really get into the business line, and that's a tough place to be, because you feel like you're doing really good work, and you are doing really good work, but you're not seeing the result you want because you can't actually get it applied. were you able to sort of, where did you find that fit in your career where you did feel like you were more able to actually get some of the stuff deployed and have a better sense of whether it was working or not working?
Mhm. Um, I think I had a little time, I'm trying to think now. I'm like, what was in between that and then going to, uh, oh, so interestingly, between that experience and then landing at Eliza for a while, um, I was I was back in some epidemiology and research work for a bit, um, but doing um, doing intervention design for some conversation agents, and and in that, I think we were able to really start to see some of that actually applied, which was very interesting. And then took that experience onto Eliza, where they were surprised. I was the first person who ever came in with conversation design experience. They had to teach everybody on the job and prior, and I was like, oh yeah, I know. Actually, I've been
I've
using
been
script
doing this for a
builders.
while. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, so it was really cool. It was like at that time, like wow, I just landed my dream job, to work there and really be. So it was. I think there was also very exciting because at the time, now they went from I think HMS and then maybe back to being private. I can't remember now they're Cotivity, but prior to all of that, when we were still Eliza, um, I think we had really good working relationships with the mostly insurers that we worked with, um, and did our best to be able to look at the get the claims data or other data we needed to really look at outcomes. So that was something that from early on I'd been pushing, pushing, pushing. Like we can't if we can't measure this, like what are we doing?
What is the
But
point?
there's a lot of behavioral science out there that you just you never know. it, did it help? Did it actually maybe do harm or the reverse of what you were thinking? Because a lot of that happens, as you know. Um, and it was also there where the model that we worked on in the client work was very collaborative and a partnership between our business folks and our designers, our operators for everything that we did. It was a nice, well-oiled machine. It's still one of the things I think about when I think about great PMing and all this. It's like, those were the days.
Well,
But
double click on that. What made it great? What made
yeah,
it, when you think about great PMing, when you think about a great environment for a behavioral scientist to do the work,
yeah.
talk to me about what that environment looked like for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think um, I don't think you necessarily need this piece per se, but it did help that we worked in kind of like a pod model. So we were working with the same group most of the time, even on different clients. And then there were like different pods, but not always. And even when it wasn't the case, I think there was a couple dynamics in terms of um, deep respect and value for each other's work and really trying to understand that perspective that everyone was bringing to the table. I have unfortunately encountered many skeptics in other places where they were like, yeah, behavioral science, or because I think for those of us who are really trying to do it well, there's some rigor involved, and there's some pieces where it takes a little bit of time for us to make sure we've got some things buttoned up before we can get in there and test. That was respected, and I think that they saw that um, what I brought to the table from the behavior science perspective was very valued. And we worked together always to ensure that we were very tight and on the same page about what we were talking about with our clients. So those conversations were always very productive. We were able to move them toward um, like trying things that sometimes there were very hesitant to do early on, like getting them to try an intent question thrown in with, somewhere in like a flu campaign or something like that. Like just, what can we do? And then doing some like A/B testing and some other things where we're really able to start to do that. And then working closely. Our data scientist folks weren't really part of the pod per se always, but we worked also very closely with them on how can we think about modeling this and predictive modeling, and how can we keep advancing our work. And there was a lot of rigor as well that I think I really appreciated, and I think helped uh, so much with the success of what we were doing.
Did you
Um,
did you get pull
yeah,
from the clients, or did you, from the insurance companies? So I was on the other being, we almost overlapped when we were using Eliza at Clover. I think Clover used it a little bit later than after you had left, but I definitely broke their system, right? I was like, I've rewritten your script. Here are all the things I want. They're like, it can't do any this many conjoints. I'm like, make it do this many conjoints. They hated me. Um, were you hearing, would you feel like it was you pushing into the client, hey, we want to try this intent question, hey, we want to try these things? Or did you feel like insurance companies were pulling, from you, hey, we want this kind, hey, Eliza, we want this kind of perspective?
hmm I would say mostly pushing on the client. Um, Almost there were so many times where um, if it was like a new group within the company or something we were working with, um, that we heard like, can we just scare them into making a change? I cannot tell you how many times people wanted to, like the default was like showing up with a fear appeal. And it was like, well, let's talk about that and why maybe we want to try something different. So but I think we did sometimes have some folks who were a little more interested um in sort of the behavioral science and mechanics of how this all worked, and um but but not as much as you might think. Actually, I think they were also leaning on our expertise a lot.
Let's double click in there because I think it's a useful lesson. What did you do when a client showed up and said, hey, like, can we use fear to encourage? I think,
Yeah,
you're talking about we're talking about a 2005 here. Nobody knows what behavioral science is, whatever. Now you're at Eliza.
right.
We're a little farther along in the journey. People have
Yeah,
started to read books. They have some concepts, but generally they're misapplied, right? They're like, I read a thing and now I want to do this thing. And you're like, that is a example from a book that is not meant to be that is descriptive and not prescriptive. And you are treating it as very prescriptive. How did you push
right.
back against that? How'd you have that conversation?
Yeah. So it wasn't just me who was on kind of like in the design, we called it, side of that work. Um, Although it might just be me having an individual conversation with the client, but then we'd often take these things back to the team and we would flesh out like things we could quickly leverage. Like, let's get something kind of concise here on fear appeals. Like, throw in some citations if they want to look at it, and sort of like, what's our recommendation? Why? So that we could quickly kind of pull those things together. So it was, I think, educating. Also always bringing up the ethics, right? And like engaging in that conversation around what would that mean, and how does that fit within your core values? What could this, but mostly like, okay, we're talking about fear appeals. They're really tricky. They don't usually work. They can often backfire. It's like, is that really something you think we should try? We have all these other tools at our disposal. Here's what we recommend. And actually, there wasn't that, if any, much pushback. I'm trying to think of other examples, not just fear appeals. Um, Nothing is jumping to mind at the moment, but there were other things, right, that we would, it's like, oh, somebody asked about this, like, let's put this little thing together. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the one the bugaboo that always got me was, can we just pay people, right? The number of
Oh
times that people
yes,
want to just, people are coin operated machines. If we just give them a gift card for getting their
true.
flu shot, they'll do it. We can launch, paper after paper that shows you that gift cards don't raise, people's flu shot percentages.
Yes.
But by God, people want to try them.
That's a good one. Absolutely. Incentive, incentive, incentive. And now that you say that, that's probably actually much more, what happened more often than fear appeals.
It's almost as if we predicted Trump before it happened, incentives and fear appeals, incentives and fear appeals. This
Yeah.
has worked well for totalitarian governments and health insurance companies, apparently.
Oh
So
gosh.
then we also cannot pass over your time at Eliza without mentioning the fact that you were the voice of Eliza uh,
Oh gosh. Yes.
there for a while.
Yes, I know. And that's a funny story. I did not go in going, I'm going to become the voice of Eliza or anything like that. I was just talking in meetings with folks, and there was one woman who was getting very burnt out doing, well, who was the voice of Eliza. Really, there was nobody else. And we were recording many hours of things every week. And so I think she was regularly kind of like, oh, is there anyone out there? But there was kind of like this approval process, right? Of like, it has to be kind of the right voice that passes the client's tests and is suitable. And somebody was like, I think you might like fit. And I was like, really? And I was like, well, I'll try it. And it was just kind of this funny thing where like people emerged out of listening in the recording booth and they were like, oh, I think this is who we've been looking for. So I wasn't the only voice of Eliza, but I became for a while probably the primary voice to in giving this other person somewhat of a break, which was great. And it was so much fun to do. You get into this little booth, it's got all the soundproofing, and it's very quiet in there.
Yes.
It's like, I don't think sometimes we realize how much noise is all around us all the time. And
Until the voice of God comes down, right? So when Random House was publishing the book, they said, "Do you have a great speaking voice? Would you want to do the audiobook for Start at the End?" And you're just in this little tiny booth, and then the voice of God is like, "Do it again, do it again. We didn't like that take. Do it again." It's like
oh my gosh. Well,
some
you
sort of
know what?
like,
Luckily, I didn't have anybody like hanging over me. If I did need to re-record, it was like telling me later, and then I went into the booth for so little bit different experience. Um, but in order to really get the warmth and the kind of like the tone and everything else we needed or wanted for the voice of Eliza, I had to do things like really smile very brightly while I was talking, and and just the way it was, I would come out of there feeling so good because I was just like smiling for like a half an hour, like
I have
it was
been
really
so
interesting.
happy while I did this thing. So good.
Yeah, but yeah, that was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. That was such a unique opportunity. I'm so glad I got to do it.
And then how did you end up, you went from Eliza, and you were there for quite a while, over 2 years. And then you went over to UMass.
Oh yeah, so it was the same one of the same groups I had been working for prior, where they were doing the conversation agents. Um, there was an opportunity to join up with them again to work on some, and this was a little more of a cross between um, kind of like design strategy and business design, because they
Mm,
were really trying to uh, I guess capitalize is the first word coming to mind. But like, how could they take some of um, the inventions and things that were happening that professors were creating? And there happened to be one in the group that I had previously worked with, which was um, a nutritional assessment tool, and they wanted to digitize that.
mm.
And for the first time, is something called a food frequency questionnaire, and it was usually paper based. And we wanted to kind of like, how do we take this and modernize it and also maybe like help to scale it more? but there's also a number of other groups that wanted to use that, and coming up with sort of like how does the university spin that up as a source of income. So
Hmm.
it was a very interesting move for me to be able to now kind of try to put the business pieces together, the maybe strategy operations, which I think I have something about that in my LinkedIn bio these days or whatever it says, because I love connecting those dots of how, sure, you have all of this strategy and everything there, but how do you actually make it happen? How do you make this come to life? And what are all those pieces that need to come together? And then I probably would have been there longer, but then I got a really interesting opportunity to go to the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. So that's the national center. Um, and ended up being there for almost 4 years. And I would have probably still been there had there not been some changes under the first Trump administration that caused that to like really change shape.
And what more important behavior change than suicide prevention, right? It is the behavior that staying alive, it turns out, is the behavior that enables all other behaviors. Uh,
Yes.
and so talk to me about how this sort of came along to you and how you decided whether this was something you want to do. I mean, how you have, at this point in your career, you're quite mature. You've been at this for 10-ish years. How are you evaluating opportunities? How are you looking at like whether something is something you're interested in or not? Like, how do you have these conversations at that point?
Mm-hmm. Um, this came across my desk from my previous, graduate advisor, and I was like, looks kind of interesting. And I asked him like, what did he think? And he's like, I think you would be a really stellar candidate for this role, given that it's very broad in scope. They have never had anyone come in to actually kind of uh, look at product communication, all of that within the center. So I decided to apply, and it was also, I think, being able to have more accountability and a little more challenge for me professionally. And I, as much as I like want to empower people through my work as like our end users, I found, especially when I was at Eliza and starting to do some more like official management of people, that I really enjoy people leadership and working with them to like help them on their path. I, I find that very fulfilling. So now, and with that, considering all of that, it's like this seems like it would be a good challenge. And then so I ended up getting the role and stepping in there, and it it might still to this day be one of the most challenging roles that had taken on, just in terms of how like the change management aspects of it as well, because it was like the steering committee charged the uh the center with bringing on somebody and who could help take a very kind of like public old public health model of an institution into kind of like a more modern approach in terms of comms, all of that, and product. So it was extremely challenging from the internal, like the people perspective, than more so than I would have realized, from getting like all of the comms product, all of that kind of, you know, under one umbrella, consistent branding, all that. It took time, but that wasn't actually as challenging as it was to move a whole organization into a different way of thinking.
Yeah, this is the whole
And
other
that,
side of behavior change, right? We often think about the externalized, user-facing, client-facing version of behavior change, but there's, speaking as someone who just took on a CXO role, right? Most of my energy is spent on the 500 employees who report to me and how do I get them to do the behaviors that I care about, more than it is like how do we get our clients to do any particular, this, that, or the other. So that
yes.
is a huge, and it isn't something we talk about often with early career behavioral scientists, right? It is a very externally focused discipline in many ways. But
Yes.
inevitably, if you rise to leadership, that's going to be an important part of your experience.
Yes. Which has, I think, really shaped where I've been going since, which is we're still often having some kind of like product or like more external, client or customer, patient, pick the word, um, term. Like there's some of that work often, but it's now been much more of a combination of the internal and the external. And I think it's so important. And I think we need to do more of it in general of how do you connect all of that? Because it really has an interplay in the success of the business as a whole, right? And I think I don't think there's enough eyes on that um in most places quite yet. Um so that's the kind of perspective I've since I've been at and left and now SPRC, Suicide Prevention Resource Center, that I'm trying to bring wherever I go.
And talk to me about that, bringing that to onboard, because you were there for quite a while. Like,
Yeah.
talk to me
Oh.
about how that experience at suicide prevention helped you sort of bridge over into this more business focused role,
Hmm.
which you're
Yeah.
certainly more business, more on the business side at Onboard Health than perhaps anywhere else in your career. Like, how did you make that
Yes,
transition? What did that
that's
feel
true.
like?
Hmm. um so Andre and I met on Twitter in the 2000s, and we've been collaborating on things here and there over the years. Um, and when he started Onboard Health, I came in as a kind of community advisor at first, and then we've been talking and kind of like, maybe I can help you a little bit with this, and maybe there's like some here, and kind of just morphed into a like the with the timing of uh his like where he was with the business and securing more contracts, et cetera. I was like, maybe it makes sense to come on full time. So I came in as the head of strategy and operations and was really with that lens of like, how do you tie all of this together? And it was incredible. I think there was a lot that I had. There was a bit of a learning curve, I think, especially in the HR operations side of some things. And though certainly as a leader in other organizations, I had dealt with many HR things, but not running payroll or, I wasn't like the payroll team and all of those, but now I was.
Yeah.
um, and it was, we leveraged some platforms that made that pretty easy, but also thinking about as we're growing the team too, like how do we really intentionally want to help shape the culture? What about policies? And as you know, I think all of these things have like you can look at from the behavioral science lens of how do you want to shape all of this. So it was really a wonderful experience, and we had, as some people who are following digital health may know, we had kind of like a cliff like all of a sudden in terms of the revenue projections, all of that, and so it made sense. Um, as the strategy and ops person, I was like, we can't afford me anymore. So it's time for me to probably find something else. So I'm not, all the money for the
So it
business
doesn't
kind
end
of
up in
going
like,
into a full-time role, right? It's like I either need to be fractional or something. So it, I think that might have been one of the most interesting parts of being in that role was to say, you can't really afford to keep me in this role anymore. So I'm going to fire myself. Um, but yeah, I think it was a very interesting because the business had the like community side, it had the client side, and is sort of connected, and then of course the business side of onboard health. So how do you keep all of those things um, connect in the most strategic ways? And it was very rewarding. I really
and
enjoyed it a lot.
you make an important point there about knowing when to leave, right? When is the, to quote Mercutio, like when is the sport at its best, right? away, the sport is at its best, right? We're at this moment where, it's time for me to transition, and that can be personal reasons and that can be business reasons. The business can be very strong and you could still know, hey, it's not the right time. This
Yeah.
is not the right place for us to focus our energy. I remember as I was exiting Clover Health and, they were preparing to going public, and I'd done that dance before and didn't super enjoy it. Because it kind of, as a behavioral scientist, it sort of freezes you in carbonite, right? You can't, the whole point of going public is that you're in this moment of evaluation and you can't really do anything new or press any really hard because the market needs to evaluate you. And so
Yeah.
knowing hey, that's that moment to step away, even if it means, stepping away to nothing, right? Not having another thing lined up, not feeling like it's, going to something better or different, but just knowing that, hey, this is not the right place for me in this moment, in this time. Talk to me a little
Yeah.
bit, as we wrap up. You've had this great long career with this, very serious progression from sort of, as you said, externally focused sort of behavioral science to much more of a rounded business leader. What's next for you? Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take that as you think about,
Yeah.
you know, someone pointed out recently that there's a CXO trend, right? Chandra Osborne and I both took prominent CXO roles recently. Like,
Hmm.
where do you see taking things next for you as a sort of behavioral science executive?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm in an interesting role where I am now, where I'm an advisor within the company. There aren't that many, and um, I'm sort of like, okay, what is the next big thing that needs eyes on, this lens and this, this generalized behavioral science leader lens, um, which makes sense for this hospital organization that's integrating several different groups in Michigan into one. Um, will that continue to be needed? I'm not sure in the next years, but it's very interesting and rewarding for now, I think. And I don't know what the title will be exactly, because sometimes that changes, and we certainly talked a lot about changing terminology over our careers so far. So, but I
I,
think it needs to
M
have the
Health,
right.
M Health blast from the past here.
Yeah, right. um, but I think for me, it certainly um, will need to involve a lot of strategic challenge. Um, can I be accountable for driving some of the core business metrics, um, and hopefully people leadership, where I can lean in and really help others grow as well. Um, yeah, and I think I'm always looking for a challenge. I think that my brain of mine is always looking for that kind of complexity, that next level of like, okay, what else? Where are we really having challenge to solve a problem? Let me get in there.
Well, that's what a great note to end it on. Well, Bridgette, thanks so much for coming with me. It's been fun to go through your journey. You and I have known each other a long time. You've had such a great, career. I think you're a great example of how someone can grow into a behavioral science executive rather than, throughout the course of their career. And I'm excited to see what you see next. Maybe you'll be a CX, maybe you'll join the CXO train with the rest of us. Who knows what happens next? But thanks so much for coming on and want to sharing your journey. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Matt. Likewise.